there is a kind of consensus among the speakers in these two sessions that we can't predict how long it will take. In fact, there was a talk that it can go for years. But for the conferences, it is a difficulty. You have to follow a timetable. So that is the reason that we are having this session coming to a close within few minutes. And I'm not going to talk in detail, but just a few remarks in order to avoid any repetition also. One thing that is very commonly known is that change is the only constant in human life. So the world has been changing throughout the centuries it has gone. And perhaps this is a point of time that we can imagine some kind of changes are also taking place. And when I was thinking about this point, I was reminded that today when we are meeting on 30th March, almost around 150 years back, in 1868, Alaska was sold by the Russians to Americans, and it became the 49th state of the Americans. Now, that was the global order those days. You conquer some place, and then it becomes your ownership, and then you can always sell it, or you can do something else for that area. But today's world order puts several restrictions, whether you are a global power or you are a smaller power or one of the major powers. So if a war starts, in spite of all development in the international relations, and in spite of having some global institutions, that means the global order is not being observed. That is on paper. And it is not the first time, as has been emphasized by several speakers, that the Americans themselves have done it. In fact, when I was just looking at this statement of the Secretary of State Blinken, he said, in this time of certainty, we have a clear way forward. Help Ukraine defend itself, support the Ukrainian people, hold Russian accountable. And under this heading, he has come up with several recommendations or several statements saying that the borders and territorial integrity of a state cannot be changed by force. Just keep the last 20 years or 22 years post 9/11 and see how many campaigns the Americans and allies have conducted and how much they have followed it. That it is the inherent right of citizens in a democracy to make their country's decisions and determine their country's future. Look at the statement and what has been the practice. That all members of the international community are bound by common rules and should face costs if they don't live up to the solemn commitments that they make. And there are a couple of more statements, but I'd like to emphasize one more. I would like, these principles transcend Ukraine. This is very important. But then the opening part of this statement was very important, and I would like to read that as well. Moscow's actions have threatened to set a new precedent on European soil. So the new precedent is that it is on European soil. And when we are talking of all these things, the concern is that it should not be happening at the European soil. Otherwise, it was just as normal. So that is the context in which this war has started and being responded by the so-called global community. I also went through the statement or the speech that President Putin made about the question that why are they in fact going for this war. And I found at least to me 4 major points. One is it was concerns for security, which has been very excellently articulated by all the speakers, concerns for security and a kind of increasing threat perception. NATO is coming closer and so on and so on. And he specifically articulated this point that he is, as Russian president or as a country, feeling being deceived, cheated, blackmailed, pressured on all this issue of Ukraine and NATO as association. Now, so it's a kind of response that for the last 30 years, we have been trying this and this and this, and we have been cheated. So one can go into details, and Putin in his statement has also highlighted this. He also comes to the statement that it's a lesson for us from the history. And that lesson is that when we were Soviet Union, there were points when we should have expressed our power and our will, but we didn't. So it is now an expression that I should not lose time. This is a situation where I should come with some kind of an action. And then he has also highlighted global implications of the Western hegemony and the way they are enforcing or trying to impose their social agenda, their civilizational concepts to our values to the other countries in the world, including, of course, Russia, as he said. So I think I was reminded with all these points that Putin is there for the last now 20 plus years. And even before that, he was enjoying a very important position in the Russia or earlier Soviet Union. So it's a frustration of someone who has been directly dealing. So in cases where you have changes in the government or people, so there are different kind of body languages, different kind of approaches, but someone who has been directly dealing, he can feel this kind of frustration. So can we justify that this is a good action by Putin? I think nobody would agree, because after all, war is not something that can be argued. It is a last resort. That's the international law. If you have consumed all kind of sources and there is no, and then you need a kind of permission from a legitimate authority. So war is not an option, and war brings destruction finally to both parties, although you can always say that one party has win the war and the other has lost, but the winning party also loses. So that's not the option. And this brings us to the final, to my final point, which has been discussed again and again, although nobody can clearly say, or many points have been presented, that we are going to have a kind of change in the global order. Now, this is very genuine point, but this invites us to discuss again and again and continuously watch the happenings around. But this is important that this is going to take place. And something good for us is that in this changing global order, the role of China is obviously being discussed, and it will be there, of course. In fact, without this war also, the world is changing and the global order is also changing, and China has a greater role. In fact, while it is good for us, I think it is a test for Chinese leadership also, and Professor Chang has very ably articulated those challenges. I think the unexpected thing, if it was not informed earlier, whatever trajectory it is following, it will have to face some changes. That is because they have 2049 Chinese dream, and they want to continue with a specific trajectory. And as has been rightly pointed out, that BRI is their agenda for the future, and a project in which you already have more than 140 countries associated. You would never like that the stability in the region or around or in the world is at risk. So for Chinese, it's a very big question, but as has been said, that they are a global player. There is a need, I would say, for assertiveness with this message that the world can move forward with a win-win approach rather than win-lose approach. That if that is the Chinese message, I think this gives them a test also that they continue to move in that direction and prepare ground for that. Although they have benefited a lot from this particular global order, whatever progress they have made, they have very intelligently utilized this present order. But then the order is not perfect and it has to go through a changes, and Chinese have a role that they should play. Thank you very much for all the speakers and the participants.